One of the most harrowing conflicts in modern history was the Vietnam War. This war was not just a clash of military might, but a battleground littered by cunning, innovation, and fear. Amidst the dense jungles, rice fields, and swamps, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army employed a diabolical range of traps, ingeniously hidden within the unforgiving landscape. The Vietnam War, a brutal conflict that spanned over almost 2 decades, remains etched in the pages of history as one of the most contentious wars of the 20th century. Lasting from 1955 to 1975, the war put the United States and South Vietnam against North Vietnam and its guerrilla force, the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong, which is short for Vietnam Cong San, translates to Vietnamese Communists. They played a pivotal role in the war's outcome. Built of dedicated communist fighters and sympathetic South Vietnamese civilians, the Viet Cong, supported by North Vietnam, took part in an unconventional and highly effective form of guerrilla warfare. Their ability to blend in with the locals, launch surprise attacks, and wage a war of attrition made them a formidable enemy for American and South Vietnamese forces. Among the many tactics used by the Viet Cong, booby traps emerged as a hallmark of their uprising. These carefully concealed devices left a heavy toll on their opponents, both physically and psychologically. Booby traps were strategically positioned to target American and South Vietnamese soldiers, sowing fear, confusion, and death among the Allied forces. From January 1965 to June 1970, these devices made up a staggering 11% of Army fatalities and inflicted wounds onto 17% of soldiers. But these grim statistics only scratched the surface of the profound impact the hidden menaces had on the war's soldiers. The looming specter of a booby trap lurking in the dense jungles and rice paddies weighed heavily on the minds of the infantrymen. The ever-present threat of an unexpected explosion caused a constant state of anxiety and heightened paranoia among the troops. Even if they were lucky enough to never stumble onto one, the mere possibility of finding a booby trap cast a dark shadow over their every step. This lingering fear had consequences on the conduct of the war. It led to altered patrol routes, cautious movements, and vigilance. Troops grew increasingly distrustful of South Vietnamese civilians, unsure of who might be an ally and who might be a spy for the Viet Cong. The war's psychological toll, inflicted by these silent killers, was just as destructive as the physical effects. We take a closer look at the mechanics, deployment methods, and devastating impacts of the booby traps utilized by the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong, from bamboo punji traps that pierced soldiers' feet to explosive devices that wreaked complete chaos. We'll explore the mechanics, deployment methods, and effects of these booby traps. But before we continue, if you're joining us for the first time, make sure you hit that subscribe button to unlock a treasure trove of incredible videos. And don't keep your thoughts to yourself. Drop a comment below and tell us what content you'd like to see next. Number 10. Puni Sticks. Puni Sticks, a sinister tool in the Viet Cong's warfare arsenal, left a lasting mark on the landscape of the Vietnam War. These crude but deadly devices were designed not to kill, but to inflict painful and debilitating wounds onto unsuspecting soldiers, leading to increased fatigue and psychological trauma on the battlefield. Puni sticks were made from sharpened bamboo that was hardened through the application of fire or from nails inserted into wooden boards. They were then strategically placed, typically densely, in areas pre-arranged for attack, like fields where helicopters were expected to drop infantry. This deadly ground-based trap was a complement to the guerrilla tactics of the Viet Cong, who would open fire from tree lines, creating a chaotic and disorienting battle environment. The intention behind the sticks was not necessarily to kill, but to incapacitate a fighter. A wound from these traps was hardly ever fatal, but aimed at taking soldiers out of active combat, overburdening medical resources, and increasing the psychological toll on those left to keep fighting. The Viet Cong typically covered the sticks with poison, or even in their own feces, in order to increase the risk of severe infections. A surgical report released by the US military in 1967 revealed that approximately 324 men were hospitalized thanks to punji stick wounds every 3 weeks of combat. The majority of these injuries required treatment for infections stemming from the wounds. Punji stick traps could be separated into two categories: those that needed tripwires for activation and those that did not. Among the latter, the side-closing punji trap was prevalent, involving two spiked boards hidden in a small hole. The spike board, on the other hand, functioned similarly to a seesaw, striking the victim in the torso when one side had pressure on it. Tripwire punji traps were more complex and included variations like the door trap, arrow trap, mace trap, tiger trap, and even whip trap. They utilized tripwires to trigger lethal actions like swinging doors, firing bamboo arrows, or launching giant maces. The whip trap, arguably the most famous, used a taut bamboo stick with a spiked end that would fling back towards a victim upon release. Number 9. Cartridge traps. Cartridge traps were another type of booby trap that were not only incredibly difficult to detect, but also inflicted horrific injuries with efficiency. The mechanics of a cartridge trap were straightforward. A round of ammunition or a cartridge was inserted into a piece of bamboo that had been hollowed out. This makeshift chamber of death was then quietly placed within a shallow hole in the ground, hiding its deadly potential. At the base of the bamboo tube, there was a simple yet twisted apparatus, a board and a nail. It was the weight of an unsuspecting victim simply stepping on the trap that triggered the whole mechanism. As the person's foot pressed onto the cartridge, it drove the nail up forcefully into the cartridge primer, effectively transforming the nail into a makeshift firing pin. With a sudden explosive force, the cartridge was then ignited, propelling a lethal projectile up through the victim's foot. This typically caused severe injuries that incapacitated the soldier and necessitated quick medical attention. Soldiers were haunted by the knowledge that danger could lurk beneath their feet. They had to bear the knowledge that every step through the unforgiving terrain was potentially their last. Number 8. Grenade in a can. The grenade in a can, a simple but deadly booby trap, earned its name from its straightforward construction. The ingenious device was created by placing a live grenade with its safety pin already removed into a can. The grenade striker lever was then secured tightly within the can, preventing it from exploding into action. To finish the trap, a tripwire was carefully attached to the mechanism. When an unknowing victim triggered the wire, it would put tension on the grenade, pulling it forcefully out of the can. As the grenade was freed from its metal prison, the striker lever would then be released and the detonation initiated. The grenade in a can exemplified the Viet Cong's ability to build deadly devices from readily available materials, often exploiting captured American items. Its simplicity paired with its deadly effectiveness, making it a constant source of danger for American and South Vietnamese troops in the thick jungles and hazardous landscape of Vietnam. Number 7. Bouncing Betty Mines. Bouncing Betty mines, known for their deadliness, were a formidable weapon used by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. These mines earned their famous name from their distinctive mode of activation, springing into the air before detonating and inflicting devastating injuries onto anyone in their vicinity. Bouncing Betty mines were engineered with a sinister precision. Hidden under the soil, they consisted of a main body as well as a central fuse. When triggered by pressure or any tension on the tripwire, the mine's central fuse ejected the explosive charge up. The explosive force sent the mine soaring many feet into the air before it finally detonated. This unique method of deployment ensured that the blast was directed around waist level, causing horrific injuries to soldiers caught within its radius. The Viet Cong used cunning deployment tactics for their bouncing Betty mines. They often hid the weapons along jungle paths, trails, or in areas they anticipated enemy movement. Tripwires were skillfully camouflaged within the terrain, making them difficult to detect. This covert approach played heavily on the element of surprise, catching American and South Vietnamese troops entirely off guard. Countermeasures against bouncing Betty mines were also very challenging. Soldiers learned to move carefully, probing the ground ahead of them with long sticks or bayonets in order to detect tripwires. Mine-sweeping teams with specially trained dogs were also employed to locate and disarm the deadly traps. But the mine's concealment and speed of deployment made them a constant threat. Number 6. Snake traps. The dense jungles of Vietnam were home to many of the world's most dangerous reptiles, and the guerrilla fighters exploited this resource with devastating effects. The yellow-bellied bamboo pit viper, which is ominously referred to as the two-stepper, was famous for its potent venom that led to a fast and agonizing death. The Viet Cong weaponized these vipers by dangling them from the ceilings of tunnels and hideouts. As unsuspecting soldiers walked into these tunnels, searching for explosives or enemies, contraptions would release the snakes upon their heads, inducing both panic and chaos. The king cobra was another type of snake the Viet Cong would put inside concealed containers, strategically positioned along paths or hidden in undergrowth. These containers were rigged with tripwires or pressure-sensitive mechanisms, so when disturbed by a victim, they would release the agitated, venomous snakes that could deliver a lethal bite in just a single strike. Physically, a snake bite from one of these traps could be excruciatingly painful and lethal if not treated quickly. The venom could cause paralysis, severe tissue damage, and even death if anti-venom serum was not administered in time. Number 5. The Venus flytrap. The Venus flytrap was a deadly and clever trap inspired by the carnivorous plant of the same name, known for luring insects into its jaws. The trap took the form of a hidden box or container placed in the ground, concealing overlapping barbs in a hidden pit. Typically built from a metal container, it is submerged until level with the ground surface and carefully hidden with natural camouflage like grass or leaves. The victim's misstep into this trap would cause severe injury, particularly when trying to withdraw their caught leg. Number 4. Flag bombs. Flag bombs were another tactic utilized by the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong. They understood that U.S. troops were drawn to capturing enemy flags to use as war trophies, making them vulnerable targets for this booby trap. When they were compelled to abandon a base or location, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong rigged the flags with hidden explosives, ensuring that any attempt to move the flag would trigger the charge. It was part of a broader strategy to booby trap items U.S. troops might consider keepsakes or war trophies. Number 3. Bridge traps. The bridge trap was often built over a trench filled with water or mud. Along the bottom of the trench, sharpened bamboo sticks were placed in weight, their tips strategically positioned just below the waterline to stay hidden. To further conceal their presence, sometimes the trench was obstructed to keep a high water level, while in other cases, the sticks were coated in dark mud. The middle of the section of bridge, though, held a deadly surprise. It was partially cut or weakened to ensure that it would give way under the weight of soldiers. As the bridge collapsed, those unfortunate enough to be standing on it would plummet into the bed of sharp bamboo spikes. Number 2. Mace and tiger traps. The mace was a tripwire-activated trap consisting of a colossal metal or wooden ball, brutally outfitted with spikes, weighing an astonishing 40 pounds or more. Suspended high above the ground from the canopy of trees, the mace lay in wait for an unwitting victim to find its tripwire trigger. Once activated, it would swing down with bone-crushing force, making sure that anyone in its path met a swift end. The tiger trap, a close cousin of the mace, relied on a similar mechanism. But instead of a massive swinging ball, this contraption involved a man-sized plank loaded with bricks and bristling with barbed metal spikes. When the tripwire was moved, the payload would plummet to Earth, delivering a fatal blow to anyone beneath it. And at number 1, anti-helicopter booby traps. American forces relied heavily on helicopters to transport troops and evacuate wounded soldiers. Recognizing the significance of these aircraft, the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong developed countermeasures to attack helicopters during landing operations. One of these tactics involved mounting explosive devices like grenades and mortar rounds onto trees surrounding the landing zone. These devices were positioned at just the right height to be within reach of a helicopter's rotors. A tripwire strung between loosely placed poles on the ground connected to the explosive devices. When a helicopter descended and generated a strong downdraft, it would blow the paper attached to the tripwire off, unwrapping the string and triggering the detonation. The psychological effects of these booby traps during the Vietnam War placed a major strain on the US soldiers who navigated the treacherous, unfamiliar terrain. The constant threat of hidden danger had a crippling impact on their mental health and induced an overwhelming sense of paranoia and anxiety that lingered throughout the war. This impacted morale and influenced decision-making, with soldiers altering patrol routes and tactics to avoid potential danger zones. Thanks for watching. Which of these traps would have scared you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Bye for now.